Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RealClearPolitics. Welcome to the latest edition of Poll Position, our podcast where we talk to polling experts from around the country about the 2024 election and beyond. We're joined today by Professor Charles Franklin. He is the director of the Marquette University Law School Poll, which is considered the gold standard in Wisconsin. Charles, thanks for joining me today. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Always good to be here.
Even though you are based in Wisconsin and that's your home turf, we have to talk about Iowa. It is the vote is going to take place there in the Republican caucus, less than a week away. Charles, what do you, as you look at the current polling in Iowa, and then also the history of surprises in Iowa, and maybe talk a little bit about, I know you guys don't poll the caucuses there, but that is also an interesting twist and makes it probably even more difficult for pollsters.
Indeed, it does. The caucuses have, relatively speaking, low turnout, and it's hard to know who's going to turn out. And there is that little problem of Iowa weather in January. So lots of uncertainty there. If we look at the Iowa polling over the last several months, though, Trump has been in the high 40s, low 50s in most of those polls. I think the average as of yesterday on RealClearPolitics was 51 for Trump, 19 for DeSantis, 16 for Haley. Haley's moved up a little bit, but unlike New Hampshire, where she's moved clearly into second place, it's kind of touch and go between DeSantis and Haley for second place. So I think that's the uncertainty I feel going in. It will be an absolute stunner if Trump doesn't win. There's no indication that that will happen. But who finishes second, and is it a really strong second compared to where third is? Or are second and third really nip and tuck, in which case neither of them would take a significant advantage coming out of the state? I don't think there's any clear polling data that answers that question. And so maybe we'll get one more Iowa poll from the Des Moines Register before the caucus. But mostly we're going to wait until Monday night to find out what's gone on.
Well, so that is an interesting question that you bring up, which is, and we were just complaining about this internally the other day, that most of the polls that we have right now are from mid-December. We really don't have any new data that shows what may or may not have transpired over the last few weeks in terms of trends and movement. How do you decide as a pollster, when you're going to poll, how often you're going to poll? Is it a budget issue? Do you go from election day and sort of work your way backwards? I mean, how do you decide how you're going to do that leading up to election day?
Well, there's certainly a budget issue, and that constrains all pollsters, and it's why I think we're seeing fewer state-level polls than maybe we did in the past. It just is very expensive to do one state well. As for timing, I work back from the election day. So in all of our Wisconsin polls, our final release is on the Wednesday, the week before the election. We always set it as that way, and it just doesn't move. Then I work my way back. So then we do a poll a month before, then we do one a month before that. And you could move the exact dates around a little bit, but that's my approach to it. Some pollsters, though, are driven by events, and so they're able to jump in the field quickly if a big event occurs in order to capture what the fallout of that event is. So it does vary from pollster to pollster. I think at Marquette, we're a little more regular in our schedule. Our national poll, for example, is done every 2 months and with very little variation in that. But the state polls are driven more by the election calendar, making sure that we're interviewing after the primary in August, for example, for the fall election, making sure we're in the field in January for an early look, and then in March for the pre-primary poll. Our primary is not until April. So those are major decision points about when to poll.
Well, speaking of Wisconsin, Charles, that has been the site of a number of recent poll misses over the last few cycles. And other pollsters I've talked to have said that Wisconsin presents a sort of unique challenge, even among those upper Midwest battleground states. And I wonder, do you think that's true? And if so, why is that? Why is the case that Wisconsin is so much tougher to poll?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that I do think make it hard. The most important is probably that we're just a very evenly divided state. In our polling, we're 30% Republican, 29% Democrat. If you add in those who lean to a party, it's 45-44. So we're right on the knife's edge, and it tilts a little one way or a little of the other. But four of the last six presidential elections were decided by less than 1 percentage point, and all of them by less than 25,000 votes. So that makes it tough to begin with. The second is a more technical thing. In Wisconsin, we don't register by political party. So when you sample from the registered voter list in most states, you'd know if you were sampling a Democrat or a Republican. But in Wisconsin, we don't know that. We have to estimate the partisanship. And then, of course, in the survey, we ask which party you are. But it does mean that getting the partisan balance right in Wisconsin is a bit harder than it would be in a state with party registration.
One of the things that I believe I saw you speak about this way back when, but in 2016, one of the things that we saw happen in Wisconsin, but also across the upper Midwest, was this shift among rural voters in particular who had voted for Obama maybe once, maybe twice, but shifted to Donald Trump. These are mostly white, working class, non-college educated, a lot of them. And we also saw this shift that took place among suburban voters that actually voted more Democratic. And again, there wasn't, it was based, a lot of it was based not just rural urban divide, but also on education, college educated versus non-college educated. And I know that some pollsters were not waiting for education back then. Was that a real issue? And is that still an issue that needs to be taken into account in Wisconsin and other Midwestern states?
Well, education certainly became a bigger dividing point for votes in 2016 and has remained that way. It's not the reason why we were wrong, and we were wrong. We were off by 6 points in 2016, but we had always weighted to education. So that weight was, I think, very important to do, but it didn't save us from our worst performance ever. I do think that you mentioned the growing rural vote that's gone Republican and moved quite a lot in Wisconsin, and the suburban vote around Milwaukee, especially, that's moving in a Democratic direction. Still Republican majorities, but much smaller majorities than in the past. So there's been a lot changing in Wisconsin, but it seems to have been changing in equal and opposite directions. And as a result, we've continued to have these very close elections, even though the geography of the vote has changed. And with education, the sociology of the vote has also been changing.
Obviously, 16 and 20, Trump was on the ballot. He's going to be on the ballot again. But in, for example, 2018 and 2022 midterm elections, where you had governor's elections in Wisconsin, you had Senate elections in Wisconsin, and I think by and large across the country, the polling was better in those off-year elections. So why do you think that was? Is this just a phenomenon that is unique to Trump? And how are you approaching that if, in fact, he wins the Republican nomination and is on the ballot once again this year?
It is tied to Trump. As I said, our worst was 2016. In 2020, we were still off by 3 or 4 points, still underestimating Trump's vote. But in 2018, in two races together, we were off by less than 0.6 of a point. And in 2022, we were off by 2 points. So it's not that the polling itself is broken, but it does seem, and I think this is my take on it, Trump mobilizes voters who don't normally participate in elections. He's very good at mobilizing what we call low propensity voters, people who are not especially likely to vote or who don't have a regular habit of voting. The thing that's challenging for a pollster is that people who don't vote regularly are also generally less willing to take part in polls. And so managing to reach Trump voters has been our number one objective in improving our methodology since 2016. Just to give you a simple example, In the past, we stratified the state into 5 geographic regions. Now we stratify it into 90 geographic and partisan regions to try to make certain that our sample is well balanced to capture those Republican Trump voters or those less likely Trump voters who actually do turn out for him, but then maybe don't turn out in 18 and 22 in the midterms. And therefore, our polls are pretty good in the midterms when those less likely voters aren't there. But when they come in for Trump, we have a hard time reaching them. Our new methodology is trying to mitigate that problem, but I don't think anybody's confident that we have the magic bullet for solving it.
Last question before I let you go. There's been a lot of talk recently about young voters and their seeming discontent with Joe Biden. They obviously played a huge part in his victory in 2020, and also with voters of color, African Americans in particular. You've got Madison. The university is there. It's a huge hub for young voters, and then obviously Milwaukee. These are key constituencies for Joe Biden in 2020 if he wants to win re-election. What's your sense of are you seeing those same sorts of inroads being made by Donald Trump among Black voters and also young voters? Or is this a situation where these folks may not end up voting for Donald Trump, but they may end up staying home or not voting, just not being motivated to vote at all?
Yeah, I think they're a challenge for the Biden campaign. They're an opportunity for Trump and other Republicans. I do think that some of it comes from younger voters and people of color being less than thrilled with Joe Biden right now. And that's reflected in lower job approval for him, some tendency to say they would vote for Trump. Hispanic voters in particular seem to have seen an uptick in willingness to vote for Trump. I think I'm taking a wait and see attitude. Sometime next spring or summer, certainly by midsummer, we will know for sure who the candidates are. And that'll drive both parties back to their bases, or the base back to the party, I should say. And at that point, people who are Democrats or Democratic leaning voters who are currently disenchanted with Biden will decide whether that disenchantment is so high that they would cross over for Trump or vote for a third party or stay home. I think right now the answers to vote questions and approval is a little more reflecting of, oh, I think Biden should have done better on this or that. So give it a little bit of time to see how it shakes out. That said, Democrats would be very hurt by ignoring this issue and not addressing it over the course of the campaign. Meanwhile, Republicans and the Trump campaign can continue to emphasize the issues on the border, on immigration, on the economy that have worked well for him over the last year, and certainly try to drive those issues through Election Day.
All right, we'll leave it there for this morning. Charles Franklin, Director of Polling for Marquette University Law School. Charles, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, and that'll do it for this edition of RCP's Poll Position. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RealClearPolitics. Thanks for listening.